So first up, we're going to hear from Adam and Pete around the MSAB and MSE. So I think we're ready to go, Adam. And
all right. Good morning. Thanks very much. We'll just take a minute here to pull up the proposed text. Great. All right. So it's a bit small. We'll do our best to paraphrase for this. Okay. So morning, everyone. Hope you've had a good annual meeting so far. We're in the home stretch here. Following some discussions with commissioners and Pete and myself about how to potentially identify the recommendations, or how to, move forward with the recommendations we identified in our report on day 2. Here is some recommendations and next steps. 4 general categories of action items are what we've proposed. I'll speak to the first couple ones and then ask Pete to speak to the others. So the first point is around membership and providing some advice about how the board should be constituted going forward. We're noting that the Commission agrees that the process and the advisory board ought to continue to support the management of the stock, and that membership has been reviewed to try to maintain the board as a manageable size that represents the diversity of interests. This is really the strength of the MSAB and the MSC process over the past number of years, having people come together from a number of regulatory areas and interests to provide the most comprehensive advice that we can to the Commission. We've also noted, as per our discussions at the MSAB, that having some continuity amongst membership and having staggered term expiries is important so that new members can get an opportunity to get up to speed and we can have this smooth transition. There are a number of terms that are expiring or have just recently expired, pardon me, and so I think that those memberships should be renewed for their either 2-year or 3-year term to ensure that there's some staggering amongst the different groups. We also note, though, that there is a need to rationalize some of the membership. There are a number of vacancies that I understand will not be actively filled at this time. But if there are new folks that are interested in understanding the MSAB process and potentially becoming involved in the future, everyone is reminded that the process is open to observers. Using the observer capacity is also a useful way to help new members kind of get up to speed. They can sit in the background, understand how the process works, and then put their name forward when a expiry is coming up, term expiry is coming up. I think that's it for the key membership pieces. I will go into discussion around objectives, which are particularly important for the MSAB in trying to evaluate the potential management procedures. What's proposed is the 4 procedures that Dr. Hicks identified, I think in paper 13, be codified within, sorry, a little bit higher up on the document, be codified within the publicly posted harvest strategy policy. These set of 4 objectives, which are in paragraph 6, so a little bit higher, please, are going to be the primary filter through which management procedures are evaluated. I'll pause here for a moment to let folks digest these objectives. These are the 4 policy statements that the fishery is being managed towards. Maintaining female spawning stock biomass above a limit reference point with a very high level of certainty, so 95% of the time. Maintaining the long-term spawning stock biomass above some reference point, about 50% of the time. Optimizing the coast-wide yield and limiting annual changes in the coast TCEY. These 4 objectives are relatively simple. They're common objectives throughout a number of fishery management organizations, and we think they provide a good foundation, both in terms of clearly articulating the harvest strategy policy, but also providing guidance for the MSAB in terms of evaluating procedures that perform well. We would then get into the specifics of an individual procedure at the MSAB meetings, where we can talk about regulatory area or biological region trade-offs. So our recommendation is that these 4 objectives be codified within the harvest strategy policy that's published on the Commission's website. And then the MSAB would go away and continue to examine some finer spatial scale performance metrics when we present the trade-offs to commissioners. Okay, on to paragraph 9, please. Okay. Paragraph 9 and the remaining parts of the document talks about some of the specific recommendations that Dr. Hicks and the MSAB have provided over the past week around size limits and multi-year assessments. So I'll turn it over to Pete here to speak to these points.
Okay, great. Thanks, Adam, and good morning, everyone. So as Adam just mentioned, the next 2 points that we'll be talking about are the management procedures that Alan has been working on over the last few years in regards to size limits and multi-year assessments. For size limits, as you can read here in paragraph 9, that a commendable amount of work has been done by Alan and the MSC to evaluate size limits. And the commissioners agreed that this analysis has been sufficient. Any further results may not improve any of our understanding of the consequences of this, and that they agree not to change the 32-inch size limit, and that Alan can cease investigating this in order to open up more time to look at other more fruitful investigations. In terms of the multi-year stock assessment, again, a commendable amount of work has been done on this. However, there remains a number of sources of uncertainty and variability in the potential TCEY as it pertains to the frequency of the assessments that should be continued to be evaluated and presented to the MSAB and the Commission. Specifically, some of these components include defining the coastwide TCEY in the interim years, specifying how that is distributed to the regulatory areas, and then investigating the sources of uncertainty and variability that can cause the TCEY to change between years and when there are full assessments. And then lastly, that last paragraph there, paragraph 14, speaks to future meetings. It was discussed that the best time to have a meeting and the most useful would be in the spring in order to plan for the coming year and the analysis that would then take place. And we look towards a meeting here in 2023 in the spring. That's all I have if there's any questions.
All right, thanks very much, Pete and Adam. And I would just have a couple of comments to say. I think from the interim meeting until this annual meeting, we as commissioners have had a chance to reflect on the work that Alan Hicks has led around the MSE with a lot of input from the MSAB. And our reflection led to what Adam and Pete has put up on the screen here today. It was felt by us as commissioners that we needed to provide some additional direction after seeing the results of the analysis and on size limits and multi-year that would help to structure how to move forward with the MSE. And also, I'd like to thank Alan for all his excellent work over the years of working on the MSE and providing very thorough analysis and very clear direction, or not direction, but very clear interpretation of the results and presentation to the MSAB. I'll stop there and see if any of my other commissioners would like to speak to this as well. Yeah. All right. So with that, I'm just going to see if Dr. Hicks needs any further clarification from commissioners.
Good morning, commissioners, and thank you for your thoughts on this and the recommendations and the clarity. I really appreciate this. I think the MSE process can move forward quite well with these recommendations. I yeah, so I agree with these, and I think I just wanted to note one thing. I don't know if the commission would like to have any discussion how to best utilize the MSAB in the timing of their meetings. And I see that last point there is to have a MSAB meeting before June of this year, before the SRB. And I just wanted to note that I really think that process would work quite well with direction from the commission going to the MSAB. The MSAB could further clarify and refine those management procedures, objectives, whatever's directed from the commission. And then the Secretariat can go away and work with the SRB in bringing results to the commission for the next annual meeting. So I'm happy to see that point in there. And one other thing I'm just seeking clarification from the commissioners on is there was a recommendation from the PAB that I found was really interesting, and that was talking about potential triggers. It's something the SRB noted in the past is developing what's called exceptional circumstances. And if we're going to investigate multi-year assessments further, we may, the commission may want to direct the MSAB to think about triggers or exceptional circumstances that might indicate an assessment should be done in a year that would normally not be done. Say the survey declines by a large amount, or there's some sort of other concern or risk to the stock. This is something the SRB has mentioned in the past, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions, and I appreciate the time going through this.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dr. Hicks. I guess that one had missed my observation, so I'll see if any other commissioners have any comments on what you just said.
Yeah, Alan, thanks for bringing that up. I guess I'm interested in a little bit of clarification from you with a question here. How much effort would it take to come up with some triggers or discussion around that for us? Is that something that could be done in a relatively short amount of time?
Through the chair, yes, that would be, it's something more philosophical rather than analytic. And so I think that would just be an agenda item at a MSAB meeting, and then have a discussion with the SRB about those as well, to come up with some ideas, and then to pass those through the commission.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, Paul, to me, that sounds like something that could be helpful for us.
It may be, but maybe Alan just provide a little more information on the triggers that you're speaking of.
Through the chair, yes, thank you. I think it's something yet to be developed, but the PAB certainly was talking about cases where, say, you saw a large decline in the survey. Would that trigger some concern of using the survey results in an empirical rule to set the TCUI, and would people or the commission prefer to have a better look at the potential risk to the stock from a biological conservation perspective, as well as from a fishery perspective? So I don't have any specific ideas as of now. They have developed, for most MSCs around the world, there's always been some exceptional circumstance developed that would then indicate, okay, it's not working as we might have expected, and we should make sure that we have a good look at this, so that we can just make sure that we're doing things correctly and we're not going in a place that wasn't expected through our simulation analysis. So I don't have any specific ideas at this point, but it's something that I think would be worthwhile to work with stakeholders and the scientific review board on.
Yeah, Richard, go ahead.
So in the language that we presented here, I'm kind of assuming that this issue would come under one of those categories. We kind of agreed that we need to look at and agree that we like to explore the multi-year stock assessments. However, at the time between those, we're looking at that we haven't come to any kind of understanding what, in your case, you're saying triggers, but there's other ideas you presented that you wanted some input on, whether we should just keep a static TCUI for that period, or peg it to some level of the fisc, or and I think this idea that you're bringing forward is just one of those things that might be considered to bridge the gap between stock assessments. So, and there might be more, you know. So, are you asking us to formalize that in this list of potential work for the MSC between stock assessments, or the language written here in this document covers your concerns?
Through the chair, thank you, Commissioner Imada. I think it's slightly different. The trigger or exceptional circumstance is slightly different than the empirical rule that would be used in those non-assessment years, where the empirical rule is what would actually determine the TCY when there was no assessment. But the trigger is related to that, and the trigger is, when does something happen in that empirical rule or some indication to the stock that's outside the bounds of what we expected to happen? That's really the key behind it. Is we do MSC simulations, we have a lot of uncertainty, but what if the stock just keeps declining and keeps declining? Then we might say, okay, if it gets to this point, we really have to have another look at the MSE and potentially do an assessment in this non-assessment year to make sure that we're managing this in the best way possible. So it's related to those empirical rules, but it is a little bit of a separate concept in that it's really just a trigger. We hope it doesn't happen, but we just want to make sure that we have a clear indication of when we should be reinvestigating this from a more analytic standpoint. And I don't think that the commission at this point needs to come up with any specific triggers, but if the commission does wish for some sort of triggers or exceptional circumstances to be developed, it may be useful to include a paragraph directing the MSAB and the SRB to have a think about that.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. What I was going to suggest, and I know you would like to speak as well, John, that it would be useful if you could maybe draft an outline of what you're proposing and work with our co-chairs to provide something back to the commission so that we can reflect upon it. I think what I understand what you're proposing, I think is interesting and worthy, but I would like to understand a little more. So if you could draft that and provide it back to us, I think that would be very helpful so that we can make a decision around it. John?
Alan, your response to Commissioner Yamada prompted I guess another desire for clarification for me. Is it fair to say that these would not be mechanistic triggers? In other words, they'd kind of be considerations or indicators that the commission may want to deviate somehow, may want to have an assessment sooner, rather than something that would essentially be flipping a switch, that if the given circumstances happened, then the result would immediately follow.
Through the chair, I think it can go either way, actually. It can be more of a consideration for the commission to a flag, you might say, or it could be a mechanistic trigger. In some of the tuna management strategy evaluations, they have actually specified if the trend of the stock or the survey or the CPUE drops below this point or this percentage, it triggers that an MSE must be done. That's not necessary. It could say, look, with this amount of change in the FIS index, the commission may want to consider conducting a stock assessment in a non-assessment year.
So, Paul, just for clarification of your comment, when are you thinking we would get this outline and potentially, if we like the idea, take action on it?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on what Ellen provides us, but I think there has been discussion at the SRB in the past, and so it could be relatively quick, I think, John, but it really depends on what we see from Alan And I think it probably would not take them very long to put it together, and I would like to see the co-chairs review it and provide some direction back to us.
Yeah, that works for me. Thanks.
Are there any other comments or questions for Alan? No. Thanks very much, Alan.
Thank you.
So now, if there's no other questions, I think we're fine. Adam, Peter? Pardon me? Yeah, you're all done. So we can now move on to the next item.
Thank you very much, Chair. So if I could just have the second version, and I'm hoping it's the right one that's gone on the screen. So this is just a quick overview of the remaining decisions that need to be made for this, the 99th session of the annual meeting. So I'm just going to walk through these relatively quickly and pass to commissioners to address. And so you've just heard on the first, the Management Strategy Evaluation and MSAB Looking Forward presentation. We have 6 other elements that we need to walk through for final action today. I'm not going to read through these in detail. We're just going to step through each one by one. And the first in that regard relates to Proposal A1, the 2023 Adopted Mortality Limits, or TCEYs, and I will pass to the chair. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much. If we could have the table populated, if you wouldn't mind, can we do that for 2B? All right, so what we have here is what's for 2B is 6,000,078 million pounds for 2B for 2023. This represents a 10.3% reduction from the 2022 TCEY. The other point I'd like to make about this is that the Area 2B allocation represents incorporates a 50% U26 adjustment as well. It's part of the 6.78. I think now we'll move on to the US section. John?
Okay, thanks. And there we go. We have the table populated. So move that we adopt the TCEYs reflected on the table here. And I have quite a bit to speak to here. So Paul, this is the appropriate time to run through that?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, very good. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging all the stakeholders who are involved in the IPHC process, both from the US and Canada, and really throughout the range of the resource. So from the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, east to British Columbia and down to California. All of you have a stake in the Pacific halibut resource, and I, for one, deeply appreciate everybody's involvement and passion in the scientific and management issues. And of course, on behalf of the 3 U.S. commissioners, I want to extend deep thanks to our team of advisors from NOAA, the Department of State, and the states of Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and California, as well as the Secretariat. Regarding the Commission's TCEY decisions here, I want to preface my comments by noting, as some of you have heard me say before, that I'm really concerned by what the dashboard in front of us is indicating with regard to the halibut resource, with many signals that a cautious approach is in order to safeguard the stock. And that's true this year, as evidenced by the Commission's TCEY decisions. And I dare say that we're likely to be in this position for some time to come, with the prospect that future cuts may be necessary. So I'm heartened that so many of us seem to share that view of the situation. I think that's a really good indication. But I just want to go over some of the indicators that led to these numbers. And some of that bears repeating as context behind the Commission's adopted TCEYs. So the 22 set line survey and directed fishery, commercial fishery catch rates were at their lowest values observed in the last 30 years. The stock is at an unprecedented low population level due to poor recruitment. The 032 weight per unit effort, as indicated by the survey, was down 18% coast-wide and by considerably larger percentages in some regulatory areas. There's currently a strong reliance on one-year class from 2012, which is anomalous and perhaps unprecedented. An overall decline in fishery efficiency, an overall low level of productivity, and a downward trend, even though with a new natural mortality level, we've discovered that the fishing intensity rate has been considerably lower than we thought. And we're also seeing periods of low recruitment that we haven't seen since the 1960s. And layer on top of that, an additional question mark related to the effects of climate change on the resource. So that's a lot to consider. And again, a lot of indicators that provided context behind the commissioner's decision making. I'm grateful to the many U.S. stakeholders who devoted their time and experience and brainpower to developing and recommending mortality limits via the conference board and the processor advisory board, and in many side conversations and other communications with commissioners. At the risk of stating the obvious, it is quite challenging to balance the huge variety of biological and socioeconomic considerations across all of the regulatory areas. After carefully considering stakeholder recommendations, ultimately, we as commissioners decided that some additional cuts were needed and appropriate in several of the regulatory areas, both in response to area-specific conditions and also so we could get the overall coast-wide TCEY down a bit lower and lower the level of risk as indicated by the Secretariat's decision table. So we ultimately decided on a coast-wide TCEY level that is 10.3% lower than last year, reducing the level of risk from a status quo of 49% down to a 38% risk that there will be a declining stock trend in 2024 that is less than what we see in 2023. So as for specific regulatory areas and rationales, I'll just walk through those briefly. Area 2A remains unchanged at 1.65 million pounds. That's in recognition of the United States government's trust responsibility to the 13 treaty tribes in Area 2A that depend upon halibut. And it's also based upon an observed 10% increase in the set line survey 032 weight per unit effort in Area 2A. In Area 2C, the 1% reduction reflected here corresponds to the reduction observed in the set line survey weight per unit effort. I'll note that 2C has the highest weight per unit effort of any regulatory area, which is a good sign. And the adopted TCEY results in a cut of about 60,000 pounds to 5.85 million pounds. The resource trend in Area 3A is quite concerning, and we see that in the FIS results being down by 37%, as well as what we see in fishery performance and what we hear from fishermen. This was a very difficult decision for U.S. commissioners, but we chose to go beyond the 15% cut recommended by stakeholders and instead cut by 17%, which we recognize is a very big drop in 1 year, but I believe is called for under the circumstances. And the approved TCEY is 12.08 million pounds. In Area 3B, I gather there was quite a bit of discussion amongst stakeholders that led to a recommendation for a modest increase in TCEY, and that was in recognition of favorable FIS results last year that were larger than this year's 13% decline, and also recognition of an increasing 032 distribution for 5 years. However, despite those things, here the commissioners judged that a reduction is appropriate, and we chose a level of 6% as a compromise between the stakeholder recommendation and the decrease indicated by the FIS. And the resulting TCEY is 3.67 million pounds. Area 4A, the survey weight per unit effort was down 26%, and the stakeholder recommendation was to decrease TCEY by 15%. Similar to 3A, here the 15% recommended cut was an acknowledgement that the trend is steadily downward, but tempered to 15%. That is, the recommended cut was tempered to 15%, since very large decreases in 1 year are very challenging for harvesters. That said, in Area 3A, the U.S. Commissioners chose to go beyond 15% and instead reduce 4A by 17%, which I recognize is a lot, but again, I believe is called for under the circumstances, and the approved TCEY is 1.73 million pounds. In Area 4B, stakeholders recommended the status quo of 1.4 million pounds based on a relatively flat trend in the survey results. Here, the U.S. Commissioners decided to be more conservative to help reduce the coast-wide TCEY, and therefore we chose a 6% reduction for a TCEY of 1.36 million pounds. And finally, for areas 4, C, D, and E, the FIS 032 weight per unit effort was down 6%, and the adopted TCEY mirrors that reduction to 3.85 million pounds. So taken all together, this results in a coast-wide TCEY of 36.97 million pounds, or a 10.3% reduction coast-wide. It bears saying that cuts like this are never easy, and they have real-world consequences for users across sectors. So again, I'd like to acknowledge stakeholders' recognition that there are many concerning signals that the commissioners are seeing. So appreciate that. It's never easy to deliver unwelcome news, but I do think we should all anticipate that this challenging situation is likely to continue for a bit longer, and further reductions could be required to conserve the halibut stock, as we all hope for better recruitment and certainly hope for stronger year classes to come. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. David?
Yeah, thank you very much. And just a note, some of you with a sharper eye have probably already caught it. The USA total should be 30.19 million pounds. Thank you, and we'll make that amendment. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Dave. So is there a motion to approve?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the TCEYs in this chart.
Thank you very much. Is there a seconder?
I second.
Thanks, Neil. Is there any further discussion? Bob?
Through the chair, as a commercial representative of the commission, I'd like to comment on the region's 3A. This area had over a 30% reduction in the survey and over a 20% reduction in the commercial CPUE, weight per unit of effort, which is greatly troubling. And when both the commercial and the set line survey are showing the same direction and trend, this is greatly troubling, particularly in these magnitudes. So we tried to hold this to a 15% reduction, but we felt, and I endorse the 17% reduction there. In 3B, similarly, there was a double-digit reduction in the commercial numbers, somewhat better numbers than 3A, so we tried to hold that to 6%. 4A, this has shown over a decade of decline, both in the survey as well as commercial numbers, and so it is appropriate for the reduction there, which we initially tried to hold at 15, but we took another look at all the areas and felt this should be 17%. 4B, we don't have very much of an area that we do survey last year in that area, and the long-term trend in the commercial numbers have been down. So we took a 6% drop there. And in 4C, D, and E, most of this catch is coming out of the St. Matthew area, with very little coming off of the shelf because of whale depredation. So there is a concern of what the whole catch in this area is beginning to evolve to, as well as a downward trend in the weight per unit effort, I believe, of the same magnitude of 6% last year. So, Mr. Chairman, those are my comments relative to these areas.
Thanks very much, Bob. Any other discussion? Peter?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to just speak to actually what Jon said, concerns about the stock. We saw it, I heard it all of course through BC, but also from some folks in Alaska. And we saw it in the data that the fishing was tough this year. And that's why Canada had two important distinctions. We wanted to maintain our share, but we also wanted to share in the conservation burden evenly and appropriately, even though the coastwide there was an 18% decline. And in 2B, Canada, there was only 11% decline. We felt it was important to not only maintain our share, but share in that conservation burden. The other important thing for Canada was the recognition that this incorporates a U26 adjustment. And whether anyone in this room likes it or not, there was 1.6 million pounds of U26 fish killed, mostly in Alaska, the majority in Alaska. I'm sure everyone in this room wished that number was lower, and it didn't exist, but it's a reality, and that fish comes off the top. And we view that as treaty fish, and that Canada, the benefit is accrued to Alaska through from these operations that use this halibut resource in this way and how they are killed. But the cost is borne by, I would say, everyone in this room, really. And but specifically to Canada. And so Canada wants to be made whole from this loss, because those fish would grow and they would become, harvestable stock that would end up in Canada. And so that is why it was important principally for Canada to have that incorporated and recognized. I can understand that, direct harvesters would, in Alaska, feel that they're getting doubly punished for something that they have no control over. My hope is that this helps incentivize further reduction, and that with this adjustment, it disincentivizes this kind of fishery. Canada has no control other than through these kind of mechanisms. So again, the intent is not, the intent is to make Canada whole and to drive this bycatch down. The unintended consequence is on some directed harvesters. I think that's all for now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. Any other discussion on? I would like to just add one other thing. And I agree with Jon's comments about that this is never easy thing to do to reduce. And as well with Peter's comments around U26. But I think not to overlook this, that 6 commissioners got together over this week, and we came up with an agreement that that shares the pain, if you will, of the reduction between the two parties. We had some very lengthy and fruitful discussion that resulted in the outcome of this table. And I would like to thank my U.S. Colleagues for their thoughts and their questions to what Canada was seeking and what the U.S. was seeking. And we worked out and came to a solution. I'm positive that we will also come out to a long-term solution that we will be working on in the near future. If anyone else wants to discuss, any other discussion points? No. So anyone opposed to the motion? Nope. So it passes and we'll move on.
Thank you, Chair. So following the TCY that have now been adopted, we typically put up on screen the detailed projections for 2023 by sector based on the mortality limits that were just adopted. And these are based on the respective catch sharing plans within each of the contracting parties. And so this is simply a noting of how those overall TCYs are distributed based on those domestic catch sharing arrangements. And this will be included in the report itself and also published to the website later this afternoon. So I know everybody typically grabs their phone at this point, but rest assured you will have this very shortly. The next is on Charter Pacific halibut limits, and I'll pass to you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dave. Richard, were you going to speak to this?
And yes, so the chart in front of you reflects the outcome of the regulations that were outcome from the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council's recommendation that also reflected the decisions of the Charter Halibut Management Committee for regulatory areas 2C and 3A. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but and they'll be posted. But we adopted this framework yesterday, so there's no need for a motion, but this would be just populated in what was adopted yesterday.
Thanks very much, Richard. Any other further discussion? No, then we can move on to Prop A2, fishing periods. Bob, were you going to make a motion with dates?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would move that the 2023 season be open on March 10th and close on December 7th. And if I can get a second, I will speak to that.
Thanks very much, Bob. Is there a seconder?
Yeah, I second that.
Thanks, Peter.
So through the chair, the March 10th date comes from the PAG. And in talking to some of the commercial fishermen, it also has some is a better title opening date than the March 11th date proposed by the conference board. So we settled on March 10th and December 7th. We understand that as we get to the end of the season and late November and December, that the throughput doesn't always allow that's being landed by the fleet, doesn't always allow all the processors to be open. However, it is an opportunity for some to participate late. We have a number of commercial boats that fish peacod and have salmon tender contracts, and then they have to squeeze in their halibut sablefish harvest, and this provides them an opportunity to fish a little later and land their quota. So those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Bob. Any one wish to speak to this? Is anyone opposed? No. So those are the dates, March 10th to open and December 7th for close. All right, so here are the IPHC rules of procedure. Is there a motion to adopt? Neil, thank you. I will second that. And Bob, I believe you would like to speak to this.
Yes, through the chair, the motion in front of us proposes some discussion on proxies and how those will be designed. It also anticipates that the PAG will develop or have a meeting within the next 3 months, and that that'll be reported back to the commissioners. I think there's also an issue of designing or them discussing their membership and how that would play out as well before us. So those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Thanks very much, Bob. Is there any further discussion on this item? John?
Thanks. I'll just elaborate a little bit. We had quite a bit of discussion about this amongst the commissioners and felt that it's really appropriate for the PAB to hash out what the membership should be and provide some specific recommendations to us. So this is the reason for the work group and for highlighting that issue as part of their charge. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. Any other further discussion? Anyone opposed? No, this passes. We'll now move to the meeting calendar. Dave, you're going to speak to this?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. So this is related to paper 15 that's on the AM099 website. It proposes dates and places for the meetings of the Commission and its subsidiary bodies for the next 3 years. The dates are tentative. There are a number of locations still to be determined, but we're going to work through those based on budget availability and also timing for various board members to attend those meetings. As part of the Finance and Administration Committee meeting, the Commission has agreed and recommended that there be a 13th special session of the Commission, which will be held electronically in mid-April of this year, with the primary aim it being to review and adopt a budget for financial year 2024. In addition, at this point, we also consider the location of the next annual meeting, which will be our 100th session, and noting that that will be in the USA, I'll pass to Commissioner Kurland. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. So the United States would be honored to host next year in Anchorage, if that is acceptable to our colleagues from Canada.
Yes, it is, John.
Excellent. So I'll just note as part of that, Dave highlighted that this is the 100th anniversary of the commission coming up. And so the commissioners have had some conversation around this, and our intent is to put together a bit of a planning committee to assist with some appropriate preparations and events to mark that very significant milestone. So as commissioners, we look forward to their input and look forward to everyone's involvement a year from now in Anchorage.
Thanks very much, John. Dave, I think you were going to also give us an update as well on some other items that have already been set in motion.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And we've been getting a lot of questions about exactly when the 100th year of the IPHC starts and ends. So we thought we'd put this slide together just as a bit of a reference document for all stakeholders. So in short, the convention came into effect on the 21st of October in 1924, which means that our first year started on 21st of October and ran to the 20th of October in 1925. Thus, our 100th year will start on the 21st of October of this year, 2023, and run until the 20th of October, 2024, with the IPHC officially turning 100 on the 21st of October, 2024. So as Commissioner Kurland has pointed out, we are planning a number of celebratory events throughout the course of our 100th year. The first event will occur in conjunction with the Pisces annual meeting, which will be held in Seattle from the 23rd to the 27th of October this year. And we're going to use this as sort of an opening to showcase our scientific research and achievements over the last 100 years or so. The second event will occur, as Commissioner Kurland has pointed out, will be held in conjunction with the 100th meeting, which will now be held in Anchorage, Alaska. And the organizing committee will provide more details of what that's going to look like over the coming months. Thirdly, we're fortunate that the World Fisheries Congress is also going to be holding its, I think it's once every 3 or 4 years. It'll be holding its meeting from the 3rd to the 9th of March 2024, again in Seattle, and we'll again use this as an opportunity to showcase the work of the Commission over the past 100 years. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thanks very much, Dave. Any other comments or discussion around the 100th year anniversary of the Commission? Not seeing any, we'll move on to election of a chairperson and vice chairperson. All right, is there a nomination for a chairperson? Bob?
Through the chair, I move that Mr. Jon Kurland serve as our chair for the upcoming year, which will begin upon adjournment of this meeting.
Thanks, Bob. Is there a seconder? Neil, thank you. Any discussion? No? Congratulations.
Railroad chip.
So moving on to the vice chairperson, is there a nomination? Peter?
Yeah, I nominate Mr. Paul Ryall as the vice chair.
Thank you, Peter. Is there a seconder? Bob? Thank you. Any opposed? Not seeing any.
Congratulations to you.
Thanks, John. So Dave, I think we're now on to the adoption of the report, and do you have a few comments on that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As discussed, the intention is once we adjourn shortly that the Secretariat will collate any of the final decisions that have been made this morning into the report. We will then provide that to the contracting parties via correspondence, and probably within an hour, hour and a half or so, we'll be able to reconvene to adopt the report today, if possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Dave. Before we close this portion of the meeting, I'll just see if there are any closing comments from my commissioners. John?
Thanks, Paul. I'll keep this brief, but I'm new to the IPHC process, so I just want to express my appreciation to my fellow commissioners, to the Secretariat staff, advisors, for everyone's help as I've been learning. I still have a ways to go, but I'm working on that. Thanks, of course, for everyone's input to our decisions this week on procedure, on regulatory amendments, and on the allocations. And thank you again to Canada for hosting the meeting.
Any other comments? Well, I would echo everything that John said, as well as I'm always impressed by how smooth the meetings go. Some of our discussions can be have some tension in them, I suppose, but nonetheless, we always find a way forward. I would say this year, when we were looking at the stock assessment report from Dr. Stewart, it was clear that there needed to be action taken to reduce the harvest, and both PAB and Conference Board were agreed with that and provided us some good direction on how to move forward so that we as commissioners could come up with a decision around setting TCEYs for 2023. And so over the course of this week, we as commissioners have done that, along with the other things that we've gone through this morning. It's a long week in many ways, but also when we reach agreement, it makes it certainly much easier to arrive at outcomes that are favorable for all. So with that, I'd like to thank my fellow commissioners for all their input and hard work, and all the staff that have helped to get us to here, as well as our respective delegation and technical support that without their help in putting together lots of spreadsheets and documents that will help us as commissioners make decisions. We wouldn't arrive at this today. So thanks again. Yeah. So I think with that, I think we're done. Oh, sorry. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Chair. That's okay. I'm going to limit my comments to the Secretariat staff. I just wanted to thank everybody who's attended the meeting and supported the meeting for the tireless efforts that the staff do behind the scenes and in front of you, not only to facilitate the functioning of the meetings, but also to present you with the work that they've been undertaking over the past year. I'm endlessly proud and always very impressed with the support that the team provides. And we also have, for the first time, 3 hybrid meetings running simultaneously with remote participation. Certainly wasn't without its hiccups, and we're going to live and learn. But moving forward, having all of the IPHC meetings in this hybrid format will greatly improve the participation and ability for those working and living in remoter parts of the US and Canada to actively participate. And finally, for all of those staff who are listening back in the office, it would have been great to have you here, but we really do appreciate your efforts to support the meeting remotely. So thank you, Chair.
All right. Thanks very much, Dave. With that, we're adjourned.